Prologue. It was only a duck pond out at the back of the farm. It wasn't very big. Letty Hemstonk said it was an ocean, but I knew that was silly. She said they come here across the ocean from the old country. Her mother said that Letty couldn't remember properly, and it was a long time ago. The old country had sunk. Old Mrs. Hemlock, Letty's grandmother, said they were both wrong, and that the place that had sunk wasn't the really old country. She said she could remember the really old country. She said the really old country had blown up. I wore a black suit and wore a white shirt, a black tie and black shoes, all polished and shiny. Clothes that normally would make me feel uncomfortable, as if I were in a stolen uniform or pretending to be an adult. Today they gave me a comfort of a kind. I was wearing the right clothes for a hard day. I had done my duty in the morning, spoken the words I was meant to speak, and I meant them as I spoke them. And then, when the service was done, I got in my car and drove, randomly, without a plan, with an hour or so to kill before I met more people I had not seen for years and shook more hands and drank too much tea from the very best china. I drove along the winding Sussex County roads I only half remembered, until I found myself headed toward the town center, so I turned, randomly, down another road, took a left and a right, and it was only then that I realized where I was going, where I had been going all along, and where I grimaced at my own foolishness. I had been driving toward a house that had not existed for decades. I thought of turning around then, as I drove a wide street that had once been a flint lane beside the barley field, of turning back and leaving the past undisturbed. But I was curious. The old house, the one I had lived in for 7 years, from when I was 5 until I was 12, that house had been knocked down and was lost for good. The new house, the one my parents had built at the bottom of the garden, between the azalea bushes and the green circle, in the grass we called the fairy ring, had been sold 30 years ago. I slowed the car as I saw the new house. It would always be the new house in my head. I pulled into the driveway, observing they had built out on the mid-70s architecture. I had forgotten that the bricks of the house were chocolate brown. The new people had made my mother's tiny balcony into a 2-story sunroom. I stared at the house, remembering less than I had expected from my teenage years. No good times, no bad times. I lived in that place for a while as a teenager, but it didn't seem to be any part of who I was now. I backed the car out of their driveway. It was time, I knew, to drive to my sister's bustling, cheerful house, all tidied and stiff for the day. I would talk to people whose existence I had forgotten about years before, and they would ask me about my marriage, failed a decade ago, a relationship that had slowly frayed until eventually, as they always seemed to, it broke. And whether I was seeing anyone, I wasn't. I wasn't even sure that I could, not yet. They would ask about my children, all grown up. They have their own lives, and they wish they could be here today. Work, doing fine, thank you, I would say, never knowing how to talk about what I do. If I could talk about it, I would not have to do it. I make art. Sometimes I make true art, and sometimes it fills the empty places in my life. Some of them, not all. I would talk about the departed. We would remember the dead. The little country lane of my childhood had become a black tarmac road that served as a buffer between 2 sprawling housing estates. I drove further down it, away from the town, which was not the way it should have been. Should have been traveling, and it felt good. A slick black road became narrower, windier, and became a single lane track I remembered from my childhood. Became packed with earth, knobbly and bone-like flints. Soon I was driving, slowly, bumpily, down a narrow road with brambles and briar roses on each side, wherever the edge was not a stand of hazels and wild hedgerow. It felt like I had been driven back in time. That lane was how I remembered it, when nothing else was. I drove past the Caraway farm. I remember being just 16 and kissing red-cheeked, fair-haired Callie Anders, who lived there, and whose family would soon move to the Shetlands, and I would never kiss her or see her again. Then nothing but fields on either side of the road for almost a mile, a tangle of meadows. Slowly the lane became a track, it was reaching its end. I remembered it before I turned the corner and saw it in all its dilapidated red brick glory, the Hempstocks farmhouse. It took me by surprise, although that was where the lane had always ended. It could have gone no further. I parked the car at the side of the farmyard. I had no plan. I wondered whether, after all these years, was there anyone still living there, or more precisely, if the Hempstocks were still living there. It seemed unlikely, but then, from what little I remembered, they had been unlikely people. The stench of cow muck struck me as I got out of the car, and I walked gingerly across a small yard to the front door. I looked for the doorbell in vain, and then I knocked. The door had not been properly latched, and it swung gently open as I rapped it with my knuckles. I had been here, hadn't I, a long time ago? I was sure I had. Childhood memories are sometimes covered and obscured beneath the things that come later, like childhood toys forgotten at the bottom of a crammed adult closet, but they are never lost for good. I stood in the hallway and called, "Hello, is anybody there?" I heard nothing. I smelled the bread baking and wax, furniture polish and old wood, and my eyes were slow to adjust to the darkness. I peered into it, and I was getting ready to leave when an elderly woman came out of the dim hallway holding a white duster. She wore her gray hair long. I said, "Mrs. Hempstock?" She tipped her head to one side and looked at me. "Yes, I do know you, young man," she said. "I am not a young man. Not any longer. I know you, but things get messy when you get to my age. Who are you exactly?" "I think I must have been about 7, maybe 8 the last time I was here." She smiled then. "You were Letty's friend, from the top of the lane. You gave me milk. It was warm, from the cows." Then I realized how many years had gone by, and I said, "No, you didn't do that. That must have been your mother who gave me the milk. I'm sorry." As we age, we become our parents, live long enough, and we see faces repeat in time. I remembered Mrs. Hempstock, Letty's mother, as a stout woman. This woman was stick-thin, and she looked delicate. She looked like her mother, like the woman who I had known as old Mrs. Hempstock. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see my father's face, not my own, and I remember the way he would smile at himself in the mirrors before he went out. "Looking good," he'd say to his reflection approvingly, "looking good." "Are you here to see Letty?" Mrs. Hempstock asked. "Is she here?" The idea surprised me. She had gone somewhere, hadn't she? America? The old woman shook her head. I was just about to put the kettle on. "Do you fancy a spot of tea?" I hesitated. Then I said that, if she didn't mind, I'd like if she could point me towards the duck pond first. The duck pond? I knew Letty had a funny name for it. I remembered that. She called it the sea, something like that. The old woman put the cloth down on the dresser. "Can't drink the water from the sea, can you? Too salty, like drinking life's blood. Do you remember the way? You can get to it around the other side of the house. Just follow the path." If you'd asked me an hour before, I would have said no. I did not remember the way. I do not even think I would have even remembered Letty's Hempstock's name. But standing in the way of that hallway, it was all coming back to me. Memories were waiting at the edge of things, beckoning to me. Had you told me I was 7 again, I might have half believed you. For a moment. "Thank you," I said. I walked into the farmyard. I walked past the chicken coop, past the old barn, and along the edge of the field, remembering where I was, what was coming next, and exulting in the knowledge. Hazels lined the side of the meadow. I picked up a handful of the green nuts and put them in my pocket. The pond is next, I thought. You just have to go around the shed and I'll see it. I saw it and felt oddly proud of myself, as if one act of the memory had blown away some of the cobwebs of the day. The pond was smaller than I remembered. There was a little wooden shed on the far side, and by the path, an ancient, heavy wood and metal bench. The peeling wooden slats had been painted green years ago. I sat on the edge of the bench and stared at the reflection of the sky and the water, at the scum of the duckweed at the edges, and at the half-dozen lily pads. Every now and then I tossed a hazelnut into the middle of the pond that Letty Hempstock had called. It wasn't the sea, was it? She would be older than I am now, Letty Hempstock. She was only a handful of years older than I was back then, for all her funny talk. She was 11. I was. What was I? It was after the bad birthday party. I knew that. So I would have been 7. I wondered if I had ever fallen in the water. I had pushed her into the duck pond. That strange girl who lived on the farm at the very end of the lane. I remembered her being in the water. Perhaps she had pushed me too. Where did she go? America? No, Australia. That was it. Somewhere a long way away. It wasn't the sea. It was the ocean. Letty Hemstock's ocean. I remember that. And remembering that, I remembered everything.